So, good morning, Nicolene. Really
Good
glad to have
morning.
you. Yeah, really glad to meet up with you. We've been threatening to do this for a long time, putting our collective spaces together for the small business community, and I'm really looking forward to spending this time with you.
Thank you so much for the idea and for being here today. It's an absolute pleasure. Always enjoy our conversations.
Fantastic. So today, what I really wanted to speak to you about was to get some insight on the different business types and what they mean, where they apply, when to choose them, etc. And it was particularly prompted by on a post that I saw recently on LinkedIn, where the person commented that small businesses are often penalized by your funders, especially if they are not registered businesses, if they're trading as sole props. And that's what opened up this whole thing for me. I didn't realize that there was bigger implications other than just personal choice. Call me naive, but the legal space isn't mine, and that's just been my own personal journey as the kind of businesses I've been involved with. So that's the context to this discussion. And with that, I thought, you know, who better to speak to but you, with regard, coming from this space. And I think before we even get into the questions, I'd just love to hear a little bit about your background and your business and why you have an interest in this space and why you have the authority to speak into the questions that I have.
Oh, thank you so much. I suppose this is the part of the conversation I may not be very good at, but I'll give it my best shot. Um, yes, I come from a family of entrepreneurs. I grew up in a household in the Free State. I'm from Bloemfontein originally. And my mother was the first person to actually take the big step into the journey of entrepreneurship. I was still in primary school, and she, together with friends of both my parents, decided to go into a partnership together. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, as unfortunately many partnerships unfortunately don't. And then for a long time, I think she really wanted to explore, can I do this by myself? And so she embarked on that journey. And I was actually in grade 8, back then standard 6. Maybe that gives away our age and all of that. And she started her own retail business. She is an artist, so she owned an art gallery, and I was part of a lot of the growing pains. I saw the long hours. I saw all the sacrifices, and I think you have to be blind if that doesn't leave an impact. My father's journey as an entrepreneur was a little different. He took the decision much later. In fact, I was quite deep into high school when he decided to start his own engineering practice. Um, and it had a different flavor, although, he had a lot more experience and he was well known in the industry. I also saw how it was tough for him to come from almost a corporate environment into the lonely journey that we've now experienced on our own bones. So when I went and studied, I was still very involved with my mother's business specifically. I helped her with a lot of the administration and all of those things. She had the creative eye of making sure the displays looked well and all of that. And I wanted to help her with what I thought to be my strength. And I was doing this until I was also studying. And then there was a notice up on the notice board at the university for some jobs at the faculty. And I thought, I won't get any of them, but let me apply. Why not? And as fate would have it, I actually landed all three of the vacancies. And at that point, I didn't want to let her down. So I transitioned out, trained someone to take over the functions I was doing, and I went into pursuing the career in law full time. And that took me to Johannesburg, where I did part of my articles. And then later I ended up back in Bloemfontein to finish my articles. And at some point I thought, you know what, I've been to Gauteng and I've been in Bloemfontein. And that's been such an enriching journey. but I think I would like to go and visit the Cape to see what life looks like there. And back then, I think I need to say in our industry, particularly if you worked in Gauteng, you looked at the Western Cape offices, and there was a bit of a, call it a tongue-in-cheek comment that, if you work in the Cape office, then you don't work very hard. So I thought, you know what, I don't believe that to be true. I think it's what you make of it. But the Cape had an appeal for me because my paternal grandfather lived in the Cape. So it's the only sort of reminiscence of family that I had when I moved to the Cape. Um, and it gives you a bit of a different lifestyle. If you want to get a break away from work and go and explore, there are so many options, which we didn't have in the Free State nor in Gauteng. So for me, that was the big appeal, to see how do we balance that side of your life together with the career aspirations. And so I ended up as an in-house counsel in a mining company. And at some point, my then employer said to me, well, we're moving the head office from Cape Town to Windhoek. And because we had traveled for business back and forth between Namibia and South Africa quite a lot in that space and time, I figured, you know what, I've been to the Free State. I loved it there. Joburg was an interesting experience, gained so much experience from a professional point of view. But I think the Cape is home for me. So I said, well, I don't think I'll be going along, but I'll tell you what, I can start my own firm, and then you can be my client, but I need the freedom to take in other clients. And that relationship maintained itself until they actually sold the mine. So as I said, the rest is history. And then my journey started in entrepreneurship. All the things, I think you are young and you've got much more guts than brains. Let's be honest. We take a lot of risks when you're young, and possibly we don't even know that we're taking those risks. And I started off as a sole prop. And my mother was in a partnership, and my father was a sole prop. It took a long time for us, for them, and then for me to actually incorporate, register the business. And in those days, you had one consideration, and it was really, what does the tax bill look like? And
Correct.
at which point does that become a little bit more cost effective? But now I've learned that it's not really only about that. And this journey is very lonely. And that's why it's important to surround yourself with people that know much more than you and I do. And I think that's the power in these conversations, really. So I've exclusively worked with entrepreneurs in my legal practice since its start. Yes, I did have one larger client, which was my former employer, which did kickstart things for me. But, there are days where you think, oh, goodness, am I going to make all the bills this month? The stress starts around the middle of the month. And those are the things we don't talk about. And those are the things we bury really deep down inside, because if we dare say them, then they are real. And then we need to do something about it. So I think I felt it on my own skin and in my own bones. And I've been privileged. Every morning I wake up, regardless of how busy life is or how uncertain the world has become, I am grounded in the fact that I am absolutely privileged to be part of these journeys, these absolutely creative people who come up with these fantastic ideas to make the world a better place. And that's, I think that's in a nutshell who I am. I love this space.
Yeah, and I think your line of work is so valued because as creative as one is, you have to be grounded in reality and be protected on so many different fronts. So I think there's a tendency amongst entrepreneurs to, well, for one, just not be aware of it. And as you say, take risks. And so even if you are aware of it, later, or it's not for me, let's not even go there. But yes, there is definitely the value of solid legal foundation as well. And I'll circle back to that later as far as what you provide to specifically to the small business sector. I know you've got some very valuable products and services there. So, but Nicolene, so circling back, just now you spoke about, those days your biggest concerns were the tax. How much tax do you have to pay? And knowing what you know now and having traveled in the small business space in depth, would you mind just articulating what the primary types of business categories there are? I think most of us, for me, I only knew about a sole prop CC and a PTY. And I understand there's a lot more to it than that. So would you mind just giving us a brief overview of the different types and maybe essentially what differentiates them?
So I think if we start with the sole prop basically means you are the business and the business is you. So there's no need for you to sign surety for perhaps the lease agreement or the overdraft facility that you have for your business. It's you and the business is you. So if you default on any of it, your personal assets are exposed. Now, in addition to that, remember, as with anything in life, when it grows, the revenue grows, but also the risk grows. So the minute we start employing people and we are sole props, our risk profile exponentially expands. And that's really where I think there's a huge risk that we don't see. Now, of course, often we think, okay, then we need to share the risk, right? That's a common principle of insurance as we know it today, is how do we completely avoid risk? We can insure against it, or at least spread it, so the insurers and the brokers speak of diversification and all these big words, but actually just means we need to spread the risk. So often people think, but let me add a business partner, and then we have a partnership, and then we share this 50-50. What many people don't understand is if your partner were to leave, it kills the partnership. Then we need to unbundle this thing. And that means any sureties that may have been inadvertently taken upon yourself, that all of that needs to be taken apart, almost like breaking a puzzle to pieces and putting it back in its box. And that's often a very costly exercise. Similarly, if your partner were to become incapacitated, let's say, heaven forbid, an accident, or that person becomes sick and they cannot work anymore, or even completely incapacitated from a consciousness point of view. Let's say that person's in an accident and they're actually not awake. They're in a hospital bed. They haven't passed away. They're not awake either. It leaves you in such an uncertain space. So there's no perpetual continuity or perpetual continuance, that it's an organism that continues beyond the people, essentially. So if your partner dies, also it kills the partnership. The partnership dies along with the partner who passes away. So for those reasons, it's really not something we recommend anymore. A few years ago, much like the marriage in community of property, it wasn't something we debated. It was quite okay. We could manage it, right? And in many ways, a partnership is a business marriage in community of property where we pull everything into this, the good and the bad. And that's really where our risk lies, because we're living in a very uncertain economic climate, and we have for many years now. So it's not about the risk only between you and your partner. It's also about the outside and how that can bring risk into your life. Then we did have the CC. It was a wonderful construct. Why? Because in certain ways, it brought this automatic right that everyone gets to manage the business and everyone shares in the profits. So you are both, in today's words, you're both directors automatically and you are shareholders automatically. And for many family-run businesses and small businesses, this was very appealing because it created that sense of participation and inclusiveness. But it also gave us better tax rates, it gave us less compliance, less red tape, and for the most part, it was a very successful endeavor. Fast forward to 2008, we have a New Companies Act, which in fact we still call the New Companies Act. And maybe it's force of habit. I mean, 2008 is quite a long time ago. So it's by no stretch of the imagination new anymore. But its predecessor dated back to the 1970s. So maybe we should just see it, so maybe we are going to call it new for a long time. But now the Companies Act has done away with CCs. So you can't register any new ones since the enactment of the New Companies Act. It doesn't, quote unquote, kill the old ones, but it sort of tries to fit a square peg into a round hole, because now we are saying you don't actually have an inherent right to participate in management. The owners have to decide who is the manager or the director and who's the shareholder. And now we've got a private company, or Pty, that has many of the same advantages that the CC had in terms of the small business tax incentive. We've got a number of compliance components that need not occur in order to mirror all the advantages in some way. But there's a clear distinction between the owners or the shareholders and the directors. In most instances, they are the same people because we choose them to be the same people. In other words, if you and I have a business, we can choose. Both of us are directors. We each have one vote. We can even choose to say, if we can't agree on something, an external person can break our deadlock, or one of us, depending on how we've constructed our arrangements, can have an extra vote or a veto. Now, of course, that's always quite dangerous, and we need to caution against it. It could be useful, but it also, if it's just the right without any boundaries, it could actually open itself up to abuse. But now also we are expected to see this Pty as an organism by itself. So although the CC from a legal point of view is also an organism by itself, and I call it an organism for a specific reason, we tend to talk, all of us, we tend to say, my business, my company. But actually it's not, right? We are the custodians. At most, we are shareholders. We own shares. We can say that's an academic argument. But actually, that company, if you look at the director duties, is very much treated as its own person. And as a director, you're not allowed to have any personal agendas. You must do what is best for that organism. You almost need to see this as your child. You need to raise them. You need to feed it. You need to nurture it. And you need to guide it. So for us, we don't speak of our children in the same sense of ownership as we do with our businesses. And perhaps if we debunk that, we'll all be better off from how we make decisions for our businesses and in our businesses. So overall, those are the options. The trust, a business trust, used to be an option, but it's become so terribly expensive since the early 2000s already. From a tax point of view, I mean, it's one of the highest tax rates in this country. So it can own an asset like, for example, shares in a company or a property, but it shouldn't be the front-facing entity with a customer where we have the exchange of money, revenue being generated, expenses being paid, because then it becomes a very expensive vehicle. It's taxed at 40%, as opposed to the corporate tax rate, which is 29%. I mean, it's a huge difference if we look only at that. So we use it for its preservation tool, but I don't want to put it forward even as an option. It's simply just too expensive. It would be silly for anyone to explore that. But for it to preserve assets, as the trust was actually intended to do, very useful till this day.
I had actually forgotten about the partnerships. I've got a question on the CC. As much as you can't get a new one, is it still possible to buy a shelf CC or take a CC name over from someone else? Is that still permitted?
Absolutely. And I'm not sure if the shelf company environment still actively sells these shell CCs, for lack of a better word. I know that has a bit of a connotation. But often we still see people buying CCs as businesses when they acquire a business. What we do see, however, is that once that transaction is completed, either as part of the conditions to the transaction, a conversion to a PTY is required, together with, the appointment of a director or directors and the creation of shares as opposed to members' interest. So really to transform it into what we now know as a PTY. And the reason for that is really because of this blend of management and ownership rights. So we really struggle from a governance point of view, from a decision-making point of view, to assert, was this a director decision to which we are held to a certain standard? Or was this an owner decision where there are very few standards to be met other than just acting in good faith towards your fellow shareholders? And that's the big problem. Directors have to act in the best interest of the organization, of the company. But with the CC, because we have that blend, where in which box do we put this? So for many transactions, it's actually a prerequisite to say, guys, do the conversion so that we can understand where the decisions are made and whether there's any risk exposure for us. Or they often buy all the assets out of these CCs so that they don't have to really take over the entity and anything that happened historically in the last 10, 20, 15 years, as the case may be, or longer.
That also makes me understand better then why the CC would have been done away with. I can understand now that there was reasoning behind that. Another question I have for you is, when it comes to number one, let's look with the first question. If you are setting out into business, or you've been maybe starting out as a sole prop or just hobbling along with some clients and not thinking even what you are, what are your options for getting advice when deciding which type of entity to go with? I mean, obviously I'm going to partially answer my own question here, but it's lawyers or accountants. But is there anybody else? I mean, I know you've got your Chamber of Commerce, for instance, but where's a good, neutral, unbiased, and kind of dogmatic place to go for advice on what is the best fit for you, and what criteria do you look at? So there are actually two questions in that: who and what to consider.
So I think it really depends on your industry. So for many, and I personally don't like this phrase, but bear with me, I'm going to use it. If we speak of people that we put in the box of creatives, and I really don't like boxing people in, because if you speak to anyone in industry, they'll call anyone creative that has a craft that has any form of creativity in it, whether it's a designer or a web designer or a florist. Everyone is just bulked together into that category. I think for many of us, even with professional services, now let's leave professional services like lawyers and doctors aside for a moment. Many of us who have something human we sell, I would rather want to phrase it that way, something that comes from inherently being human, something that stems from our creativity and our innovation as humans. I think for us, you have to build a name for yourself. And often there's really nothing wrong with trying to do that as a freelancer. In other words, a sole prop. But that would only be in proof of concept phase, I would say. Again, it depends on your industry. With lawyers and doctors and other professionals, yes, you can be a sole prop. And even if you incorporate, so for example, our firm is incorporated as an Inc., right? Inc. is reserved for lawyers, doctors, and other professionals. And what that means is in other companies, PTYs, your directors are shielded from directors' liability or personal liability to the extent if we do something wrong, we breach our duties as directors, then we become liable. But in a professional services environment, every decision we make for this business, we are responsible for if it goes quote unquote pear-shaped. So there's a limited shield of protection for us. And there's higher thresholds to make sure that we've got financial backing in the decisions we make. So we can't take huge risks. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you don't want someone to take uncalculated risks in a professional environment, because if that tumbles, inevitably sensitive work to their patients or clients will be impacted by that poor decision. So there is a higher expectation. But I do think if you're still testing concept and you're still testing, can this work? There's nothing wrong with doing it in your personal name. But with that said, it's become so cost efficient these days to register that PTY. In fact, CIPC has its own online shop these days. I think it's called Biz Portal, if I'm not mistaken. And over there, you can register it for a couple of R100. Not, I believe I've heard for less than R500, you've got your business registered. And it's a simple process as opposed to what it was even as close as 3 years ago. And what does that give you? It gives you at least a shield of protection. And it allows you, once you are confident this is what I want to do, this can work, that you can start collecting your invoices in the correct way, that it becomes a little bubble where the business is separated from your personal. And therefore, I would say if you are a parent, maybe you're the breadwinner and you've got a family, you've got school-going children, you've got a lot of responsibilities on that level, limit your time as a sole prop to the bare minimum, just to test your concept. Once you've got a concept that works, one of the books that I read when I was building some of my solutions is called The Lean Startup. Highly recommended, and I know it's more for the tech space, but it teaches you about prototyping and not over investing and exposing yourself, just to get to that point of, can this work? Is it sustainable? Can we do something with this, or do I need some help? So I would say you need to test that concept, and there are so many great initiatives out there. Chamber of Commerce, I feel, is good for network building. It's good maybe to meet a mentor, someone who's been there, someone you can learn from. But I also think it's absolutely critical at that stage. I was lucky. I was mentored by a bunch of people, and still till this day I am. And I think as you progress, you become the mentor to others and you pay it forward. But I think back when I started, coaching wasn't an option. There wasn't someone you could go and knock on the door and say, I need someone to help me navigate this and just help me get out of my head. So if I was going to be honest, I would say I think that's the best investment you can make as early on as ideation. Read that book, see what you can come up with, and let someone navigate you through this. And you'll know when you've got that proof of concept, okay, it's time. Let's not expose our families and our personal assets, our house, that sort of thing, to the decisions we make around this concept. Let's segment it out.
That's very helpful, a very good, very practical guideline. And as far as, so you can register on your own, and if somebody says to you, oh, your accountant can do it for you, or your accountant says to you, you must, or, I'm still thinking that, are there times and places that you would rather go through a professional, through a lawyer, or through an accountant, for instance, or anyone else you would recommend? I'm just curious to know if there is especially for first people are new, as you say, when you're going lean startup style, and you feel like, okay, I'm needing someone to guide me now. Are you saying it's totally unnecessary to go and register the PTY yourself on the business portal? Or are there times it's better to go through someone who can tell you, for your type of idea or rate of growth, for instance, this is the model you should be following?
So we don't have as many options with business structure anymore. We've got the Inc. for professionals and we've got the Pty. We don't have the CC anymore. I don't recommend the trust. The trust can be something you can work into your structure to preserve assets, whether it be the shares of this business, whether it be property, extra property investments you have. It's really a tool to help you build a legacy for the next generation and to keep it safe from any creditors, really. That's it. That's what a trust does. We have to gravitate out of either partnership or sole prop. And there's a fine balance. So once we've proved concept, even just to a point where we know, okay, we are going to have a meeting now to take this to market. We need to be ready. Before you have that discussion, that's when you need to forge that relationship with an attorney. Now, of course, the minute you start selling, in other words, you start generating any form of revenue, even if it's at a loss in the books, right? Whether there's a big loan account because you've put in some cash of your own, some time. Usually we all start off with a bit of a negative balance, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's just the way it goes. But the minute we start invoicing or charging for what we do, I would recommend that you get an accountant. Do it right from the start. SaaS has evolved into a hungry lion. That's the only analogy I can use. And unfortunately, we've come from a history where we've had a lot of non-compliance on a very high level. So all of us are now treated and painted with the same brush. You have to comply. And it's a really difficult platform to work with. I did my own submissions in the beginning. Best thing I ever did was to outsource that and to get some proper help. You know what? We can cobble something together and we can think, okay, it's good enough. That's the one thing we should never postpone too long. When does the lawyer become useful? Before we try to take to market. Why? Because maybe you have something patentable and now you've shared the recipe. And do you know what? Most people don't know. If you share because you want to make the sale and it was patentable and you didn't, then it's not patentable anymore the minute it's disclosed. Then you've lost the right to do that. So there are these fine nuances which we don't know. And then we step into it inadvertently and we actually kill it before it has had a chance of its first breath. So before you go to market in any way, you need to have a relationship with that attorney. So you can do your own registration, but then the question becomes this prototype, which we have to value. We have to attribute some financial value. How do we get this prototype or this concept that we want to take to market into this? And if we don't do it right, then of course the tax man comes knocking. So we shouldn't wait too long to take that plunge. And that's why many people, including the CIPC and government organs, would say, register and do it through a company from the start. Now, if you have aspirations to go into business and it's a question of what do I go into business with? Yes, register it from the start. And what we take to market can evolve within that structure. And you could do the registration yourself and then at least minimize delaying that and having to put whatever you've built into that. Because if we don't do that correctly, then you'll get a huge tax bill. So it's really important, I think, to have that conversation the minute you're sure this is what I want to do. Even if it doesn't have a prototype yet, if you're still very much in ideation, get someone to navigate you through as a coach and get that lawyer and accountant in early so you can grow with them.
Okay, that's very, very wise insight. And what this brings me to as well is the idea of the separation between the company and the product name or the brand. So you might have a company with a few services underneath, and some of them might have their own names. I don't want to open a can of worms, but each one of those need to be treated in its own legal process as well. So I'm gonna park that there. Just going back to the idea of the trading under your own name or the company name and when to register. just want to point out as well that it is possible, am I right, you can have a trading as. So I know with my previous company, I had a trading name. So the world saw only my business name. They didn't know whether I was a sole prop or anything until anyone asked. Obviously, I didn't write Pty behind the name because it wasn't a Pty. But am I correct then that whether or not you're a sole prop or Pty doesn't really have bearing on the name of what you take to market, and also doesn't have bearing on your bank account name. For instance, if you can have a bank account for the name of the business that you're trading as without you having gone the whole subsidiary.
Absolutely. The banks have become a little more tricky. So maybe starting with the difficult one, the banks really follow suit on their own internal processes and their own internal risk appetite. So, for example, if a foreign national wants to start a company in South Africa, some banks, I'm not going to name names, require that person to get on an airplane, travel here, and open the account in person and sign a whole bunch of documents themselves. Then you have other banks who say, no, we are happy with a local person being nominated together with this foreign person, and for there to be a contact person locally, and they can then handle all the administration around opening the account. So, in the same principle, some banks allow you to choose your name, others want you to say so and so trading as, and others to say, you know what, we can't do that. We only open the name in attributable to a person or an entity, no trading
Okay.
name. So it really depends which bank you go to these
Which bank?
days. It's unfortunately not a copy paste, but your trading names are still possible. And I would encourage anyone wanting to, whether you are trading as a company under the style of something else, it's, if you have a really funky business name and for whatever reason you want the company name to be different, or you're doing that in your own personal name, trademark whatever you go for so that that brand is protected, so you don't have someone passing off or an argument later down the line that, you know what, this is not your company name, you've got no real legal rights to it. Of course, we can prove if you've used it for a long time and who was first, then there's an argument to be made, but it makes life so much more complicated. So if you are settled on that brand likeness, that logo, that name, spend a little bit of money. It's usually give or take 20K if you have to register it across 3 categories. It's usually between 1 and 3, sometimes more. But it's money well spent and you'll make it back. Right, so go and sit down and think, how many sales do I need to make to pay for this trademark application, and get it done? Because the alternative of having to prove that you were the first and you were the person that actually used it first and you designed it, much more expensive than that 20K in a high court, or any other forum for that matter, than just biting the bullet and getting it done properly from the start.
That's really good advice. It reminds me of a previous podcast that I saw you on, you in a group context, and you raised a point that was such an aha moment for me. I'm going to put it there if you want to add to it. You're welcome to, in case I've missed something. But the idea behind it was to, as early on in your business journey as possible, to start the legal foundations as well, because of the value that it gives to your business in time when you come to sell it. Where people spend time and money and energy on what it looks like, they often the legal foundation underneath that is soft. So, and I'm thinking about things like service level agreements and your memorandums of understanding and all that type of thing. So I was fortunate to sell my first business. Person I sold to actually had a legal degree, so he was able to take care of all the paperwork behind it. But to your and I say that because there was an immense amount of trust there, but he could have taken advantage of my lack of having this information. And in my case, the selling price wasn't contingent on that. But what you pointed out was that if you could lose value in the property, in the business, by not having those things in place, completely just not knowing. So maybe just give us an example of a story and throw some numbers around just for some dramatic effect, but just to illustrate how how vital this thinking is. It could be a small amount, but it could be a large amount of money at stake here.
Let me give you two very, very quick scenarios. And of course, for confidentiality reasons, the names and the scenarios have been tweaked a little bit to protect but these are based on real stories. I want to put it out there. We worked with a client who built an absolutely phenomenal technology-based business, a really, really innovative piece of tech. And they were so concerned about how the functionality worked and the benefit that this could bring to the greater societal context and how it presented and how the user experience was. They never actually signed anything on the partnership level, and they didn't really sign anything with the developers. They had a huge team and a lot of funding that coupled this. And unfortunately, the end of this was that there was a competitor, and till this day, we're not quite sure how the information leaked, that launched very close in proximity in time to their business. And it had enhancements that pushed them out of the market. And we can sit and debate and say, how did this happen? But to me, it's from the outside point of view, quite clear. The first thing that happened just before this competitor launch was that there was a bit of a scuffle between the owners, between the partners. And I think we don't know this. We think it's our opinion that one of the disgruntled people actually sold some of the information. Now, because there was nothing in writing, there was no structure beyond going on what we suspected, and of course, going through a forensic exercise, which they didn't have money for, we were unable to actually prove. And that's why I'm saying we think this is what happened. And that had real potential. Now, fast forward, those people, the remaining ones, have started something else, and today they are very successful. Lessons learned, huge school fees, lots of trauma. But this time we started from the start, made sure that the registration is in place, the MOUs are signed when we negotiate, NDAs, all of those things. And then, of course, we document exactly what everyone's role is going to be and their risk exposure. The other side, and this is what we see every day, is that we have a generational thinking, and this was more a service-based business, highly specialized in their particular craft. And this person thought, my kids are going to take over my practice. They have all gone and studied in the same direction. And one day, that's what we were preparing for, the handover, the family office setup, the constitution, all of those things. It sat them down and said, I'm sorry, we've decided to go a completely different direction. We don't actually want to do this. It's not personal. And at that stage, we then went and said, okay, let's test the market. Let's get a business broker and let's try and market the business. And the business was worth a good couple of million. And all the valuations that came in were extremely poor. And when we asked for reasons, all of them pointed to, but, this is not a corporate structure. This is a structured like a mom and pop shop. And what am I buying if I buy this? Because the clients love mom and pop. They're not going to want to work with us. So what are we actually buying except a couple of machines and maybe a little bit of infrastructure, but then we still have to build ourselves. So it's actually worth nothing. So we then took 5 years and we mapped out with a professional team. What do we need to do in order to make this business reflect the value that it has? And we started systematically from the bottom up. So we had to break before we could build. So we have to redo the foundation. The foundation is no longer a family business with familiarity that can just seamlessly go from person to person, the attribution of client. It has to be a scalable operation. How do we automate? What do we document? Hardly anything was documented. We went through this exercise, and today, in rands, that business was sold about 2 years ago for 40 million for 40 million rands. It was sold in euros, so back then the exchange rate was pretty much what it is today. And it was actually bought over by a collaboration partner that wanted to expand its reach into the African region, and then purchased that business. And today, they had their transition of 3 years to hand over, and that business is doing phenomenally well because the environment was conducive to that. And that's what we need to caution in our family businesses. I know it's difficult because it's family, but we have to remember that this is an organism that we need to ready it for the world out there. And by not documenting it and by not keeping our options open, by just thinking, oh, it's a family business, it has to go to the kids or to some member of the family or some familiar person. What is our plan B? Let's not get caught off guard, because, they were almost 70 when they were able to exit. I mean, 5 years later than what anyone had anticipated. So I think that was the big lesson for me, is we need to get the basics right. We don't have to overextend, but we need to get the basics right from the start.
Those are valuable insights, and I've seen this myself. It seems to be I don't know if it's a stage of South African history or what, but there's a lot of these people in their 50s, 60s, 70s that are maybe more 60s and 70s that are now ready to retire and haven't looked back and, or haven't prepared for that succession planning. But it comes quickly. But what I wanted to say as well is what the other side of that is that even if their children had taken it over, it now becomes the same problem. So you're setting your children up for the same lifestyle you had, which isn't fair either. There needs to be I advocate when I coach families in succession planning to succession plan twice, to hand over to your children, but to have immediately a parallel process whereby the children can exit quickly if they wanted to or needed to. So it's not to just pass the baton on, but to definitely formalize and put structure in place. So that was interesting. So Nicolene, thank you so much for all that. It's been very insightful. Before we wrap, is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet, or that you'd like to recap, that you would say, if you've only got one bit of advice to give to small business owners, and I'm saying people with maybe up to 10 or 20 employees that have kind of already got their product market fit and they're now busy growing, what is the one bit of advice you would like to give to save a lot of pain later? Things that people generally don't think about, maybe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's really what inspired us to create our two products. Pocket Advisor's online legal toolkits and Contracts for Biz, our online contract shop. At the end of the day, we should not forget that businesses exist so that it's part of an ecosystem, not the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Yes, you're part of that too. I mean, society, right? So as a business, yes, we need customers to buy from us, but what are we exchanging in return? Because that's what gives you runway. If you remain relevant because you're solving a good problem, then that's I think what we should never lose sight of, because we get so bogged down in just surviving. And that's really where the toolkits come in. We've taken what we've learned over 20 years, lots of data, and said, let's take 5 things that you need to get right at the start. And let's make it accessible, because we know you're busy and we know money is tight in that space. And that's why we've got a startup toolkit, which is really great if you're in that ideation phase and you need to get the registrations done and all of that. It takes you an hour to work through the video content. It's got all the implementation resources. So it's not an online webinar or something where you walk away with questions. You walk away with things you can actually go and implement. For the other toolkit, the SME toolkit, it's really for, you've got that concept. You have a little bit of market, but you want to go to the next level. And it helps you make sure, what do funders look at? What do corporates look at if they want to include you in a program, or give you some grant money, or perhaps include you in an acceleration? What are some of the basics you need to have in order to really get the value from that? And then as you need something, please don't go to AI. I know AI is phenomenally good for helping us do a lot of things. But remember, we are still getting to grips with what this thing can do. We don't quite understand where the data lives and where it comes from. So at the moment, we do have models that are free that do hallucinate. And remember, you are helping it. If it's free, it's never free. Then you are the commodity. So even if it helps you automate certain things, please don't use it from a legal point of view. Rather go to a reliable resource and download that document. And then we've got a whole infrastructure that can support and help you within the context of, we know your money and your time is really, really valuable because you have to get through these first steps. And those are really there to make it easier. So that would be my nugget. Don't delay that. Set your foundation. Think of it as building a house. No one builds a house without digging the foundation and doing it right. If that is right, really Bob's your uncle in terms of what you want. You can extend that proverbial house. You can go a level up. You can paint it whatever your heart desires. You can rip out the kitchen and put in the fanciest one you can think of, or whatever tickles your fancy. But if that foundation isn't right, none of that is possible. And that's what I would like to leave the listeners with today.
Fantastic. So you did mention your two products. Where is the best place? Because I'll type that up in my information down the bottom. Where is the best place to reach you? Is it a website or multiple websites? Just let me know what those names are.
So for the toolkits, that would be Pocket Advisor, one word, .co.za. For the contract shop, that would be contracts for the number 4, biz, biz.co.za. And we've got a range of options with the toolkits. It's a once-off price that you pay. No hidden costs, no subscriptions. Whilst on the contract shop, you can either use it as you need it, or you can subscribe, which brings tremendous value. But all the information are on those two websites, and they are linked to smart forms and a really nice, enjoyable journey.
Fantastic. We need more of that. Thank you so much, Nicolene. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm going to go and relook at those platforms as well. And I have been through them before and I found them really useful. But I'm going to go take another look there as well now myself. So I really appreciate your insights. I learned a lot, and you've certainly given me some things to go and make sure that I've dotted my I's and crossed my T's myself. So thank you for that, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your day.
Same to you. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thanks.